Hey everybody, this is Dust for Dust Till Dawn Gaming here on YouTube. Feel free to hit like and subscribe if you like what you're seeing here on this channel. Alright, now into the video. So, Bloodbraid Elf, one of the bigger unbannings here in Modern in a while, along with Jace the Mind Sculptor. Bloodbraid Elf arguably having the bigger impact on the format. There's a couple different reasons. It is the cheaper card to acquire. Goes into probably a lot more shells that it's actually useful in, and has a more immediate impact on the game. It's a 3/2 haster, usually bringing along another spell. The first deck that obviously came to mind when Bloodbraid Elf was unbanned was Jund. Jund was the Black-Green X midrange deck that was kind of taking a backseat to both the Death Shadow variants and Abzan in recent months. Abzan would be the one that would show up more often because cards like Lingering Souls and Path to Exile, along with the white sideboard cards, were great in a lot more matchups, and Jund kind of slowly shrank down the metagame as giant Death Shadows and Delve creatures were in the meta, and Jund doesn't kill them quite as easily as Abzan does with access to Fatal Push and Path to Exile in addition to the Maelstrom Pulses. Terminate being a little less efficient at killing some of the creatures. However, Bloodbraid Elf kind of reasserted Jund as the top, probably the top mid-range deck of the format right now, outside of the second deck that we're probably going to talk about. It gave Jund another source of card advantage in addition to Dark Confidant. It gave them a faster clock, which was one of the bigger issues with Jund, as opposed to things like Death Shadow. You had really no reason to not play Death Shadow. Now you do have a reason, although there have been one or two shells that have been trying to play Bloodbraid Elf with a Death Shadow Tarmogoyf Traverse the Uvenwall package. We're not going to cover that in this video because I think there's enough other interesting things in the format, and in my mind that was just kind of an extension of a deck that already existed. And while Bloodbraid Elf, Jund certainly did exist without Bloodbraid Elf, I think Bloodbraid Elf takes it from a tier 2, tier 3 deck that barely was seeing any play to arguably right back to tier 1, and over time, going to be hard to say, may make the deck at least comparable to the two Death Shadow variants. It may even make it better than Death Shadow. Kind of hard to say. I mean, you don't have to go down on life. You don't have to, really invest a lot of resources in getting your life total low to get your big threats online. You don't have to put a lot of things in the graveyard to get your Delve fatties up. So you just often just play your cards as you need to, one for one your opponent on the ground. That's what Jund does. Not much more to say about Jund. You've got your man lands, you've got your removal spells, Dark Confidant, Tarmogoyf, Scavenging Ooze, Lilianas, and Bloodbraid Elves, and then your various sideboard cards. Jund tends to get better in most matchups after sideboard. Very few matchups for Jund are absolutely terrible. The only matchups that are probably really bad are the Tron decks and Scapeshift, possibly still. I was listening to one of the Jund players in our local IQ talking about how he didn't like any of his top 8 matchups because there was Burn, Tron, a couple Ponza decks, and then a bunch of like a Grixis control deck, a Jeskai control deck, Jace decks basically. He'd know better than I would. I've only played Jund probably 15 or so matches of traditional Jund and 10 or so matches of a brew that I've been working on. But I think Jund's definitely improved tremendously. As we were going over the Modern Challenge when we were playing the Bloodbraid Elf Zoo deck, there was 3 Junds in the Modern Challenge this past weekend. So Jund is definitely on the rise. The deck that I think benefited the most from the unbanning of Bloodbraid Elf is a deck that honestly barely saw any play. It's a deck we've streamed. It's a deck we've played before. There's a couple different variants of this. You have the version that I went with and was able to 5-0 a friendly league here was a creature heavier version. I was playing Tireless Trackers, Piankura Nolar. I was also playing Chandra. The decks that I was playing against yesterday with Burn, I was seeing a lot more like Stone Rains and the what the heck is it called? Molten Rains, Stone Rains and Molten Rains in addition to the Melani Acid Mosses. So I'm not sure which version is better. I think both have seen play. I think the more land destruction plane is the more popular one right now, because people just like to Bloodbraid Elf Stone Rain you more than Bloodbraid Elf outvalue you. I chose in my version not to play things like Obstinate Baloth and such, but I was seeing Obstinate Baloth, Hunt Masters, over cards like Piancure and Chandra. So there's a lot of, beyond the like 21 or 22 lands and 9 or 10 accelerators, and then your 4 Blood Moon, 4 Stone Rain, and then obviously 4 Bloodbraid Elf. There's probably like 10 or so flex slots, and Ponza can take advantage of that a lot. I think this deck does a good job of attacking the fair decks in the format, the 2 and 3 color mid-range decks, the Jace decks, the Jund decks that are popping up. I suspect this deck, even like post-board configurations, has a pretty good matchup against a lot of the Zoo decks, because you're bringing in, Kitchen Finks, Obstinate Baloths, just grinding the game down to the point where you're either blood mooning them or you're, just taking over with your big life gain idiots. So, I don't know what good ways there are to attack Ponza. I was watching the 2 Ponza players, they seem to handle Tron pretty well. Both of my losses in the Swiss were on burn were to them, although the matchups were close. So I'm guessing like faster combo decks like Infact, Storm, decks like that are probably the problematic matchups for them, because they don't have a ton of interaction outside of their Stone Rains and Blood Moons. They can be disrupted a little bit with like taking their main accelerator or blowing up their Utopia Sprawled land. So there are ways to disrupt them, but if they hit to their 3, 4, 5 mana plays in a reasonable, timely fashion, this deck is very, very difficult with Bloodbraid Elf to beat now. I don't know if it's a tier 1 deck. I'm probably definitely going to play it some more after watching its performance yesterday and after we 5-0'd that one league. So I'm definitely going to be playing the deck some more, probably make some few small tweaks from the list we're already running. And even the fast combo matchups, like they can board in cards like Trinisphere, Thorn of Amethyst, Graveyard Hate. So they have a lot of options as to how to attack. Trying to think what other decks might give Ponza issues. I'll definitely have to do some research on that one. I'm not quite sure. Another deck that popped up at the GP right before Eldrazi, or right before Bloodbraid Elf and Jace were going online, was this Bloodbraid Elf Eldrazi deck without the Bloodbraid Elves. This is a deck that popped up a little bit when Eldrazi Winter was going on. I was running the 4 Temple, the 4 running the 4 Temple, the 4 Eye of Ugin, and it was running like Kozilek's Return main, so it was pretty good against, it was like the answer to the smaller creature decks that could give some of like the blue-white versions of Eldrazi during Eldrazi Winter problems. This was kind of like they were running like Lightning Bolt and Kozilek's Return, which could get like decks like Affinity that were giving that deck issues. This deck runs Noble Hierarchs and Birds of Paradise, Mindstone Talisman, so it's got acceleration. In addition to the Eldrazi Temples, you got Ancient Stirrings, Bolts to answer your opponent's early threats, and then it's just a couple of Dismembers, and then it's just Matter Reshaper, Thought Knot, Reality Smasher, and then the new heavy hitters are Eldrazi Obligator, which can make blocking absolutely miserable, and Bloodbraid Elf, which, to be fair, there aren't a ton of great hits in this deck. You've got, Obligator is fine, like if you have an extra 2 mana laying around, that's quite the swing, but usually you're not going to. You're just going to slam this into this, and you get like 6 hasty power, or you get Matter Reshaper, which can be a problem to deal with. You can hit a random mana guy, but I mean, when you're accelerating all the way up to, I believe they go up to Endbringer. Nope, this list doesn't run Endbringer. I think the list of the GP ran Endbringer in place of some of these Bloodbraid Elves. But, got a lot of acceleration, a lot of heavy hitters. I'm not sure how good this version of the deck is. We'll definitely be giving it a try here on the channel here sometime in the next week or so. There's a lot of new Bloodbraid Elf and Jace decks that we're going to try to get to. Beyond that, I mean, got a bunch of red and green cards. They're playing Chalice and Grafdigger's Cage in this particular version. Engineered Explosives, Thruns, Scavenging Ooze, Thruns just to deal with the new Jace decks. Natural State, because Blood Moon, Blood Moon's going to mess you up. So, and then Crumble to Dust, you know, getting a Crumble to Dust Tron on 3 feels pretty good. Ancient Grudge against, you know, various artifact-based decks if they're still around, despite getting junded into the ground. And then Kozilek's Return as a sweeper against smaller creature decks. So looking over the results with Bloodbraid Elf here on MTG Goldfish, Jun has 7 decks that have 5-0'd or put up results. Red-Green Eldrazi has 5, but I was only able to find this one list that had the Bloodbraid Elves actually in them. So that's why I put Ponza in front of this. Then there was the 5-color Zoo deck. There's been a couple of different Zoo decks. There was the 5-color Zoo deck that we just did a video on, but will probably actually go up after. So Bloodbraid Elf, Tribal Flames Zoo. This is basically just a Tribal Flames 5-color mana base, just 1-drops into Tarmogoyf, into Mantis Rider, Bloodbraid Elf, and just try to run your opponent over with Bloodbraid Elves, Mantis Riders, Tarmogoyfs, and your 1-drops, and then using burn spells to either clear the way or increase your clock if your opponents remove your creatures. And then you just have a whole bunch of like randomly good cards. Lingering Souls for kind of grindy or removal heavy matchups, Thoughtseize for combo and control, Grim Flare for small creatures, Ancient Grudge for artifacts, Grafdigger's Cage for graveyard hate, and Molten Rain to disrupt your opponent's mana. This deck's just an in-your-face smash mouth, and Bloodbraid Elf really plays well because you get a 3/2 haster, you get an additional spell out of the deal, which none of your spells are dead. Even your removal spells can go to the face. So the worst case scenario, you're getting a 2/3 on like turn 6. As far as other decks, Naya Company, which they're saying on here, Naya Company, basically it's a Naya Zoo list. You're eschewing running Mantis Rider for things like, and some of these burn spells for things like Domri Rade, Knight of the Reliquary, things like that. So I wasn't going to do a separate thing, because they're different in their execution, but they're similar in what the strategies that they're trying to employ. They're trying to get a bunch of creatures into play quickly and just overrun you in traditional Zoo style. The Naya Company version goes a little bit bigger than this deck. You know, they're playing a lot of the same creatures, but like, instead of playing Mantis Rider to fly, you're playing Knight of the Reliquary. So you have a little bit better of a mana base, and you're not playing Tribal Flames. So you're a little bit creature heavier, and a little bit more sturdy on the ground. So a couple different versions there. I didn't really feel the need to show a different version. You know, Jun Shadow, just similar to your old Traverse Shadow decks. Then we'll get into the last couple decks, which are Temur Moon, which I've seen a deck similar. I saw a deck similar to this. Couple decks similar to this actually. One actually top 8'd. Deck seems pretty sweet. You know, you're getting to play Jace the Mind Sculptor, Bloodbraid Elf in the same deck. These decks have access to all the good Temur cards. You know, this particular list running swords, but I don't think swords are mandatory. Does give the deck another angle of attack, but I guess Bloodbraid Elf into Sword's not a horrible hit, or Bloodbraid Elf into Ancestral Vision. So you got a lot of card advantage between Ancestral Vision, Bloodbraid Elf, and Jace. Got some acceleration with Noble Hierarchs. You've got your Tarmogoyfs, your Scavenging Oozes, Tireless Trackers for more card advantage, Kitchen Finxes. I'm guessing no additional Kitchen Finxes in the board in this particular version. But I can definitely see additional Kitchen Finxes in the board. You know, a lot of disruption, not a whole lot of interaction in the main deck. It's kind of hard to play Bloodbraid Elf. One card I did see a local grinder playing with Bloodbraid Elf was Supreme Will, which I think Supreme Will is a good counterspell that you can play with Bloodbraid Elf. Another card you can consider playing would be something like Is It Charm. There's also been a version of Temur that was running, I think I saw Jeff Hoagland streaming it, that was running Bounding Crassus and Kiki-Jiki. So you had the old Kiki-Jiki combo. So there's a lot of design space for Bloodbraid Elf to make its way into the metagame. Sideboard in this deck has a lot of different things. You know, is it Static Caster? Grafdigger's Cage is a little awkward with. I guess this particular version isn't running Snapcaster Mage, but if there are some versions running Snapcaster Mage, Grafdigger's Cage will be a little bit awkward with that. Engineered Explosives, you have a lot of 2-drops, so I'm guessing this is just mainly for 1 and 2 drops. Sometimes set it for 0 against a bunch of tokens, a couple of conditional counter spells, Pyroclasm, and then you also have the Blood Moon plan. This list is only running a couple of basics. I know a lot of the lists, the couple of lists that I saw that were running Blood Moon at the IQ were running like a lot higher concentration of basics. They were running like 3 or 4 forests, 2 or 3 islands. I think this is the shell with like the most. It's the most unexplored. You know, you could go all the way up to stuff like Cryptic Command, not run Bloodbraid Elf. So Bloodbraid Elf's not mandatory in this shell, but it certainly lends this version to be a little more aggressive than maybe the Jace heavier Cryptic Command, that kind of stuff. So Temur Moon, there's a lot of different ways you could build it. I'm not sure if the Bloodbraid Elf centric version's better, but certainly can see the appeal of running this. The only thing I would say about this deck is the struggle to answer creatures that are bigger than X5s. Like if a Tarmogoyf gets bigger than, you know, 4 or 5, it gets up to a 5-6. The only way you're answering it's your own Tarmogoyf for 2-for-1ing yourself. So I don't know how hot that is. Beyond that, I mean, it's really been the one big weakness of Temur is the removal package is weak compared to decks that have access to either the black or the white removal. Hence why Grixis and Jeskai are kind of the preferred Jace shells. And finally, we have a deck that I have not personally played in any variation in this format, and that is Elves. So, I'll be 100% honest, I don't know how well this version will perform. It's a Jund Elves deck. You're stretching the mana base a little bit to be able to play Bloodbraid Elf. I mean, you have your usual... Gnarl Root Trapper is an interesting one. I'm not sure that inclusion's correct, but beyond that, you just have your pile of normal elves. You're a little bit shorter on Elvish Visionary and Lead the Stampede to get your Bloodbraid Elves into the deck, and then you're running, you know, your Elvish Archdruids, your Azuris, your Shamans of the Pact, and then your 4 Collected Companies. So you have 32 hits for Collected Company, still pretty solid. You're not running any interaction in the main, which, to be fair, Elves usually doesn't anyway. And then 1 Lead the Stampede, your 4 Collected Companies, 4 Bloodbraid Elves. This gives the deck a lot of card advantage, a lot of redundancy. Maybe that'll help combat decks like Jund and the various Jake's decks popping up. Elves was already a pretty usual turn 4 deck, even through a little bit of interaction. So, could be interesting to see how this version does. We're definitely going to be playing Elves. Definitely going to be playing Red-Green Eldrazi deck. I know a lot of other channels have already covered like some of this stuff. I don't think I've seen too many players playing Elves. I've definitely seen Ponza popping up a lot. I've definitely seen the Red-Green Eldrazi decks tested out, and some did well, some didn't do so hot. But we're certainly going to look at them. Another card seeing a lot of play, or you might want to get for your sideboards, is Choke. Choke's pretty good against the Jace decks. So, a lot of these decks could be playing Choke if you have a blue heavy meta. So, I hope you liked our presentation of all the various Bloodbraid Elf decks. A little bit of a quick breakdown on some of them. You know, if you've seen any other Bloodbraid Elf decks in your meta, please feel free to leave that in the comments. If you personally are brewing any Bloodbraid Elf decks, leave a list. We might get to be able to play them. So, thanks for hanging out. This was Dust for Dust Till Dawn Gaming.